NEJA is in our 21st year. It's comprised of community-based organizations from the South Bronx, including Nos Quedamos, the Point Community Development Corporation, Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice. In Manhattan, it's the Morningside Heights West Harlem Sanitation Coalition. In Brooklyn, it's Uprose and El Puente, and all of the affiliate organizations that work with our community-based groups. We were founded 21 years ago for community-based organizations to support each other's environmental justice struggles and to address environmental policies that have a disparate impact on similarly situated communities across the city. It was essentially, NEJA was created in order for community groups to be able to maximize and coalesce their power. And we're here today, well, to first thank the legislature and the governor and the DEC for moving forward with Part 487 and the EJ regulations under Power New York Act that passed last summer. We're concerned for a variety of reasons. Our position when Article 10 first expired in 2003 was that given that environmental justice communities are communities that are disproportionately burdened, that we couldn't countenance power plant siting regulation that allowed additional power plants to be sited in our communities as if our pollution loads weren't already there. Our position had been for years that if you're going to build any polluting infrastructure in our communities, that we should be looking at an overall reduction of emissions, not how to mitigate additional impacts. As a result of the Power New York Act conversations last summer, one of the things that became clear was that the notion of reduction of emissions in our communities was not something Power New York could reach. But what we could agree on in the three-way negotiations within the two houses of the legislature and the governor's office is that for EJ communities, there shouldn't be the siting of any additional infrastructure that adds at all to the pollution loads in our communities. Which is how the genesis of this EJ regulation came about. It's a notion that at least the regulation's intent is to ensure that when new power plant applicants propose power plants for our communities, that they look at what so rarely has been looked at when it comes to siting of infrastructure, which is the disproportionate burdens that already are in our communities and the cumulative impacts associated with those.
We applaud Governor Cuomo for passing the Article 10 to address the reality faced by many environmental justice organizations, justice communities such as Sunset Park. We are concerned, however, that some of the proposed regulations for implementing Article 10 might actually cause more unintended harm than do good. We propose 5 key improvements to the regulations that we ask that the department address. The first one is Article 10, environmental justice protections should extend to all overburdened communities. Communities should not be screened out where, among other things, demographics change but pollution remains.
The notion that communities have to be 51.1% of color, we're not sure where or how that arbitrary standard was selected. It's of increasing concern in communities like New York City, where we see waves and waves of gentrification.
My first comment, and the most important one for our neighborhood, is that while our communities continue to be disproportionately burdened with environmental justices, some areas of North Brooklyn may fall outside of the race and income thresholds if they are rigidly defined. Williamsburg and Greenpoint, as well as Bushwick, have changed demographically in recent years, and in many places are now no longer non-white majority. However, many of those neighborhoods are still a people of color plurality. For example, many of the projects that we work on are in the south side of Williamsburg community. In the 2000 census, that neighborhood was 65% Latino. It is now 46%, but Latinos still outnumber any other demographic group in the neighborhood. Under some of the regulations as put forward, we would no longer be considered one of the trigger communities. We would no longer fit under those definitions of an EJ community based on race and income alone.
It's important that we look at how communities that may not be a majority of community of color, but clearly a plurality of that community is a community of color, is protected under the EJ regs. And we need to ensure that when we're talking about disproportionately burdened communities, that communities that somehow don't make that 51.1% or the 85% of the 51%, we applaud DEC for trying to find another kind of trigger threshold to get our communities in. But frankly, we think that using those kind of hard and rigid demographic numbers, in fact, belie what really is the point of these regulations, is to make sure that communities that are disproportionately burdened are offered the protection of no increased pollution in their communities.
Second, the areas significantly impacted by the proposed plant should be the same areas that benefit from these EJ protections. The regulations should not arbitrarily limit the impact study area to a half mile or some other distance chosen by a power plant applicant, such as a circle as indicated on that map. Nor should the regulations dilute the impact of the proposed facility by including non-impacted areas, for example, in that circle.
Right, I think the fact that they're even outlining a half a mile radius is definitely not enough, especially when it comes to air quality, and we know about dispersals of pollutants.
Third, where credible evidence indicates that there are significant impacts, the applicant should be required to address them. Established regulatory standards, while relevant, should not be the only criterion used where they fall short of what we know about environmental and public health impacts.
If a power plant applicant cannot make sure that their emissions for their proposed facility does not add to the increased background pollution loads of communities of color, of EJ communities, then if that applicant could not commit to local and verifiable offset programs, that those applications would be denied by the siting boards. That's the language of the, broadly speaking, that's the language of the legislation. It's what we hope that these regulations lead to in terms of its application to power plant siting applications.
And fourth, when considering existing burdens, the applicant should consider the minor and mobile emission sources impacting EJ communities. There should be no arbitrary limits on the types of pollutants to be considered, such as requiring an applicant to consider an undefined limited set of non-criteria pollutants. Any and every impact shown to be significant should be addressed.
The community of Hunts Point is already burdened with high levels of asthma due to an industrial infrastructure that includes over 15 waste transfer stations. The community handles about 40% of the city's waste, and the methodologies for handling this waste deal with emission polluting methodologies, lots of trucks. We're also located in the middle of 3 major highways and receive over 15,000 trucks in and out of our peninsula daily to support the second largest breadbasket in the nation.
The Sunset Park community is also the largest significant maritime industrial area, or SMIA, in New York City. Our community has asthma, upper respiratory diseases, and cancer. In the middle of all these polluting businesses, we have over 30,000 people under the age of 19, 3 senior centers, and several schools.
And finally, the regulations should keep up with new developments for assessing cumulative and disproportionate impacts. This is a new and evolving field of study, and legitimate methodologies should not be excluded from consideration because they are not well established or generally accepted. They should be.
Other matrices might include, for instance, health impact assessments. And so the point that my colleagues have made earlier about really staying open to criteria in terms of assessing impacts, whether or not they're well established or generally established, I think that's a point that we really, really want to hone in on.
These 5 concerns come out of our intimate experiences fighting for fairness in facility siting in our community and the greater New York City. We urge you to recognize and sincerely address the flaws that we have raised so that the regulations reflect the values and achieve the goals of Article 10.